A topic that pops up as a recurring trend inside of real-time strategy games is the question of accessibility. The idea is as follows. If the game is simpler or individuals can get into the game more easily, then there will be a stronger level of retention for the individuals who do join. They will see what's excellent about the game and they will stay. Now, we're going to ignore that there's a lot of things that are built into that. There's a lot of theory building and crafting that's gone in. These might not be lifestyle gamers. They might be flavor of the week players. They might be people who are fundamentally at odds with the ethos of trying to play and constantly improve and get better. They may want to be here today and gone tomorrow. They may want to play on a team. All of those things can be put to the side. There are specifics with which I'm not going to concern myself with the topic of this video. The topic of this video is going to be accessibility in real-time strategy games through the lens of making tutorials. And this is the key here, is that usually when we talk about accessibility, we're talking about either one of two things. Well, most people just mean this is how easy a game is to get into, but most people don't consider the factors behind what makes that. So we're going to consider two broad categories. I'm going to consider the social accessibility of a game. Just broadly, how popular is it among your peers? How likely is it to make inroads that way? And then the accessibility that the game offers the players. And this tends to be in the form of things like tutorials or a campaign mode or things of that nature. Now, for the first thing, for real-time strategy games, the social accessibility, I believe that this is a big aspect of gaming. This is something that most people cannot afford to overlook. It's especially poignant for real-time strategy games because it affects them so directly, and yet this is a topic that doesn't seem to go out there and catch much attention. There's something about the spark of the 90s era Doom, Command and Conquer era real-time strategy game that seems to have enmeshed itself deep inside a part of the real-time strategy game community, but that time has been and gone. We're talking about a time in the 90s, perhaps the early 2000s, and there were some experiments here and there, mostly through indie titles, but a couple larger AAA titles to try and make a console real-time strategy game, but overall, this isn't something that found its way off of computers. Now, that's perfectly fine. There are games that are massively popular, such as League of Legends, but this is another idea of the social accessibility of real-time strategy games. Games like League of Legends are phenomenal because you can play with other people. And then not only can you play with other people so that inviting them and then playing with them is easier than even setting up customs to play against them. It's in fact the point to play with them. But then you also consider getting into the game is very easy because individuals are set in defined roles, and actually the popularity of the game has an impact. There is a somewhat debunked, but still relevant as a thought experiment idea called the 6 degrees of separation, and it roughly says as follows. If you are a person, you are only 6 degrees or 6 social networks away from any other person that you can name on planet Earth. Now that is a drastic simplification and perhaps an overexertion of the premise of 6 degrees of separation, but the idea is as follows when you apply it to gaming. If there is a game that is massively popular, then perhaps you are not inundated by it. You are not besieged by all of the advertising that is found for the game, but because people are players, and players themselves are the strongest advertising for a game, word of mouth throughout the gaming community is especially powerful because individuals who are gamers network themselves with other people that have those similar interests or have similar amounts of free time with which to expend time on those interests. And so the word of mouth, the social accessibility of real-time strategy games tends not to be excellent, simply because there aren't a huge swath of players playing any one defined real-time strategy game. Similarly right now we have MOBAs. Nothing wrong with MOBAs. There are a slew of them. There's League of Legends, Defense of the Ancients 2, or Dota 2. There's also Smite. For a time there was Heroes of the Storm. There are quite a large number of these MOBAs, and for a while they were flavor of the month, and they came out over and over. But over time we have roughly decided as a gaming community that two of them have won. League of Legends and Dota 2. And which one you prefer comes back down to your background or your taste or perhaps where you're positioned in the world. But all the same, it nevertheless means that there is large social accessibility for those games. These are games that got their start in PC cafes, in LAN cafes, not just in South Korea, the PC bombs that people talk about often. I'm going to talk about something I know a bit more, which is when I was over in Greece, I saw the social accessibility of the rise of League of Legends. I was over there in about 2012. And this is about Season 2, Season 3 time frame, and there were people all over the island of Crete. Most of the PC areas of the LAN cafes that I went to, sometimes they didn't have StarCraft, sometimes they didn't have Rise of Nations, sometimes they didn't have Praetorians or some of the older RTS games. But you can bet that they had recent Madden games or FIFA games. Definitely had FIFA games, and most particularly the game that they had was League of Legends. It was obvious, it was a non-starter. In fact, even the layout of the PC cafe was oriented around the fact that this is a cafe that encourages you to play League of Legends, because all the chairs were set up such that there were at least 5 of them linearly outlined so that you could just turn to your friend here and there, and you would have a drink on the side of the desk, and you would be able to talk to everyone who was on theory on your team. And also there was a windowed setup such that if I look over this way, our team is looking over here at our monitors, and your team is looking over here at these monitors. And that's perfectly fine. The social accessibility for real-time strategy games tends to suffer because it's a 1v1 genre. But that is actually not the area of accessibility that I want to spend the majority of this video on. That's just a taster, because most people don't even consider that as a problem. They don't actually consider that the popularity is a problem. It goes back to what I was saying about advertising. It's very perverse. Individuals don't consider that the social accessibility by word of mouth, the word of mouth spread of real-time strategy games such as the war game is actually a problem, yet they believe that it can be solved by advertising. But that's a topic for a different video, 2 of which I've already done before. I want to get into the technical play accessibility, the player's accessibility of real-time strategy games. And of course, we're going to use Little War Game as the basis because that's the game that I am most invested in currently, but I'm going to pull other examples that I have seen elsewhere because I also am a player who has played multiple games, and I will talk about other games, even if this is the game, even if Little War Game is the game I'm most invested in right now. So let's talk about the player accessibility of a real-time strategy game. The typical framing goes as follows. Well, there's a lot to do in real-time strategy games. So the problem that people have is that there's too much to do. I would argue that that's a problem that even professional players of larger real-time strategy games have. But let's dial back. The argument goes as follows. Well, yes, real-time strategy games are difficult, and the problem is that there isn't a skill floor that rises up gradually so much as just a skill floor that starts as a vertical cliff face and then goes over from there. And the people who enjoy real-time strategy games are people who are something like the hikers of Everest before it became as popular, or as had some of the safeties and constraints put around it to make it easier and more practicable for even touristy mountaineers to get away with it. We're just going to have this cliff right here, and if you get to the top, guess what? Your reward at the top right here is that you can continue on and enjoy the depth of the game. In many same ways, this is actually a difficulty in the way that it is framed by the fighting game community when they ask, why can't we make our community larger? Why can't we have more people play? Because they also run into the difficulty of the player accessibility, the technical skill required for player accessibility. Much like in a real-time strategy game where you can build buildings, no one's stopping you from building a tower as your first building, or not mining with your workers or taking workers and sending them across the map, but they're so suboptimal as strategies that it is so far below what it is likely necessary for you to do to actually win and to feel confident in the game that you're basically playing a fundamentally different game. People in the fighting game community experience this all the time, especially linear battlers, so not the platform fighters such as Smash, which are actually excellent for hiding or masking or deliberately, sometimes in the case of the developer, squashing down the technical difficulty of those games. And I'm not discounting independent titles that do the same thing as well, or smaller, lesser-known titles, just that Smash is the most well-known platform fighter. But let's go on to the side-by-side fighters, right? Mortal Kombat, Tekken, Street Fighter, DBFC, for some people who enjoy playing that. And the thing about all of these games is that they share a trait that's very much in common with real-time strategy games, particularly Little War Game, which is there's nothing wrong with you just doing the punch-punch-punch basic combo, the punch-punch-kick basic combo. But if you want to know why people aren't getting involved in the game, it's because there is the matter of frame data. There are questions like, what does it mean for something to be plus frames on block or negative on block? Or for it to be to have a certain to be frame perfect inputs or things of that nature. What does it mean when the state of the internet means that it's less likely because of packet flow and loss to mean that the online play will actually transfer over to LAN? What's the barrier over there? What can we do to make people understand that actually the answer to this is just a cross counter? But the player doesn't know how to do that. The player who is doing punch-punch-kick, much like in the RTS example, is playing a game that's so far below the technical threshold that most even decent or somewhat versed, I would even say just intermediate players understand that they're fundamentally playing a different genre. And so the argument for both is the same. Well, there's a lot going on. If you can climb the cliff face, you can go over there, and then once you've reached up, then you can start the slow climb to improve. And the problem is, how do we just squash the hill down? And what's interesting about that is that I actually think that that is a flawed premise on its face. It's not how can we take this hill and squash it down. But in order to explain my perspective, it's going to be necessary to explain what the difficulties are that I think face the real-time strategy genre. And it's going to seem like I'm going off on a tangent at first, but I'm somewhat theory crafting these answers, but these are probably born from my experience and the experience that I've seen of other people's siblings, friends, family members, people I know who are prolific and proficient gamers in other respects, and they just don't approach the real-time strategy genre. I have seen it myself. It's not only that and the experience that has gone into that, but I think you'll see that once I've broken it down, there's actually quite a lot of value to this way of rephrasing the problem. Because the normal solution that is offered to this sheer cliff difficulty approach is to simply say, well, it's up to them if they want to put in the time. Or we can put in a tutorial system. But the tutorial system is going to be very involved. It's going to make sure that they know absolutely everything going in. So for instance, this kind of ethos generates things such as the Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 tutorial system. Yeah, absolutely. You want to learn Wolverine assist combos? Go for it. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. You can sit in a training lab and practice and practice and practice inputs that the game is telling you. But it doesn't tell you why you want to do them, when you want to do them, the situation that's appropriate for them. It's going to take a very long time to do them even once or twice correctly. Let's say you do them once or twice correctly. Now it's about being proficient with them. Now it's about doing it on execution. Now it's about doing it on demand. Whenever it's necessary in-game to do it, you can do it immediately because you practiced it. And this is a very lonely path for most people to follow. So here's the way I want to just shatter that, put it to the side, break it apart, and we're going to try something new, right? We're going to try a different understanding, a different formulation for the difficulties that present themselves in real-time strategy games. And hopefully you see where I'm going with this. Let's start with this. I would dismiss entirely the idea that real-time strategy games start with a cliff and the player's responsibility is to get to the top of that cliff, and only then, instead of starting over here, that they have to start up here, and it's the player's responsibility. It is somewhat the player's responsibility no matter what, but in rephrasing this will actually change the way that we look at tutorials. So let's go. Real-time strategy games are not one game. They are not one game style. They are not even close to it. There are excellent threads made in 2014 and 2015 by the players of this community, of the Little War Game community, that make the exact same point. And it's as follows. Base building is an integral part of Little War Game. Absolutely can't be denied. And it's real time. Okay, let's stop there. Base building and real time. Maybe with an economic component. We'll just say base building in real time. You realize that you have functionally generated the tower defense genre. Those two pillars are more than sufficient to make things from Bloom's Tower Defense to Poca TD to even Revion TD inside of Little War Game. They're both built on the principle of, as was said, building, buildings, usually, macro, and real time. That's it. Let's take all the aspects of real-time strategy then. So what if we have making buildings? Okay, what if we have just small unit control and tactics? I mean, that is a very generalized way of introducing all 2D fighting games. It's the perfect amount of small unit control. You only control one unit. It's the perfect amount of tactics because while there are strategies, it is heavily dependent on your execution and on your tactical decisions and your opponent's missteps and their misplays. Okay, what if we just took a real-time strategy game where you're in control of absolutely everything, the unit production, the armies, the economy behind it, all of this, and we take out the real-time aspect. Now you've made a command and control game. You have made Civilization. You have made the overworld of Total War Warhammer, of which I was particularly a fan. Okay, let's say that you remove the economic building aspect of the game. You have an army, okay? You have an army, tactics, and you don't have to worry about the economy whatsoever. Well, Army and Tactics mix games pretty easily, like Dynasty Warriors or the in-game battle aspect of Total War. As you can note, these are entire genres by themselves. If you remove real time, you make a more strategic, analytic, focused. You can make Diplo if you just take the real-time strategy elements out, and you have everything else that is normally incorporated in the genre. If you remove the economic component, you have, like I said, not civilization, but you can have simulators where all you do is build armies. Army Tycoon, Roller Coaster Tycoon, things of that nature, where there is no army. Well, if you take out the army and you just have economy in real time, you have everything from the stock exchange to idle games. There are so many things the player is in control of. Small unit micro tactics, large unit micro, troop movement, all those things fall under micro, as people call them, but that can also be like your strategy can be impacted by that. Let's talk about unit production, building production. Unit production, building production, economy, expanding, scouting, minimap awareness. All of these things require the attention of people and require them to emphasize more control and focus and skill, but you're basically playing not real-time strategy games. You're playing what amounts to 6 or 7 elements, only 2 of 3 or which are necessary to create an entirely new genre game. And I don't mean a specific game, I mean a genre of games. Okay? Take the element of APM, where you are encouraged to press buttons in the right order at the right time, and real-time strategy, because those two go together, right? You have to hit the right buttons at the right time, and then you also have to hit them in real time. It's not just order. You actually have to hit. Okay? Well, there you go. You've just made everything from Taiko Drum Master to My to Dance Dance Revolution, just based off of that. And I suppose Step Mania. I'll give you a pass, Step Mania. You've made all of those rhythm games just based off of those 2 elements alone, just off of the rhythm of controls and keys and doing it in real time. Now, that may seem like a simplification, and it is to someone who is an expert or above even a novice, I would say a novice level in real-time strategy games. The problem is that when you're talking about people ascending up the skill ladder, when you're talking about people who are acquiring the skill of playing a real-time strategy game, the first people who are joining into a real-time strategy game, they only see the clip. They only see the way that it has been presented previously. And what do I mean by this is the way it's presented previously? Well, a couple of good points here. First, Forgeable Sum and Zhao, many years prior, also made the same point. If you introduce people to the idea of tutorials, they don't like the idea of tutorials. They want to move on and play the game, which is fair enough. For anyone who doesn't realize, for instance, the work that has to go into a tutorial for you to realize whether or not you like it, you can compare such games as Cuphead, which had a very short tutorial. Something on the order of a minute or 2 to beat if you are properly versed in platforming games for the controller or the console or the system on which you are playing the game. Alternatively, Destiny Islands in Kingdom Hearts 1. Yes, that game from way ago. Think about Kingdom Hearts 1. Introduced so many complexities into the game, such as your items, your combat, the overworld exploration, what kind of game it would be like. It had a whole tutorial level that might take 15 to 30 minutes to get off of, depending on the seriousness of your playthrough. And the thing is, for real-time strategy games, we tend to follow the Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 style of tutorial. We tend to say, all right, you're going to practice skill 1, and once you've done it once correctly, you're going to go to skill 2, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and all these things build up off of one another. And we're going to, normally, the way that it's introduced in real-time strategy games, such as the craft games, Warcraft 3 and StarCraft, but also in games like Praetorians and Age of Empires and Rise of Nations, it's introduced as follows. There will be a campaign. The campaign will double over as a tutorial. And this is the desire to make a Destiny Islands Kingdom Hearts 1 style tutorial for the player. we're going to make something that's not actually that difficult for a seasoned or even somewhat experienced player. Maybe even intermediate or just above novice level players would find this, maybe enjoyable, but certainly not challenging. So we're going to scale the level of the difficulty of the campaign down. And what we're going to do is we're going to get a person who's going to experience all of the units and all of the new tech trees and all of the new upgrades, and they're going to grow and grow and grow and grow in complexity as the narrative processes or progresses. And then at the end we'll be fine. What if you didn't do that? What if you recognized that, and this is the crux of it, what if you recognized that each of those skills that you're asking the player to use that they've never used before? Most players have never played a game where they have to macro and make units out of the building. Most players have never played a game where they have to click and drag for unit selection, and so unit control is very different for them in a real-time strategy game such as Little War Game than elsewhere. Most people don't play games where their economy matters, or the economy is this invisible thing that I guess impacts the game, like more money is good, but they don't actually understand that that means building more workers and building more castles. So instead of, here's the brick and we're going to lay on top of it, until it becomes a Jenga tower, after which the player will decide that they can't progress anymore because they've lost the skills or they never acquired the skills that they need. Or, unlike the other example that I provided in fighting games where the tutorial tends to be, sit in the lab, sit in the training mode, and figure out how to do this for however long it takes you to figure out. And if you can't figure it out, that's okay. We'll just remind you that you're always bad and you needed to know how to do that because it's considered basic or simple or something that doesn't require too much effort or practice. What if instead you just said, real-time strategy games are inherently complex, and we don't want to dumb down the game. We don't want to detract from the excellence. We don't want to detract from the excellence that exists from experts in Little War Game. We don't want to detract from the people who are seeing their skills improve and getting a very real sense of accomplishment because this game is so difficult, because they are practicing skills that they don't have in other games, and they're going up and up and up and up and up, and all of a sudden being introduced to the real-time strategy genre and all of the grandeur that it exposes. It wouldn't be success to say we've just got to lower the difficulty of real-time strategy games such as Little War Game, because if we do, then more people can join. Yes, they would, but then you would be taking something from what made it great in the first place, which is all this control. So instead, here's an idea for tutorials. Split up the tutorials. Split up what is required of them as such. Make a macro challenge map. A macro challenge map for Little War Game might look as follows. The only control you have is to tell your workers to mine. The workers can't build any new buildings. The workers you can't make more workers out of the castle. You can't expand or go anywhere else. And then, to the right of that, cordoned off, there are going to be buildings that the player can build units out of. Now, make sure that the units will rally wherever they need to go fight. So imagine this new player, they're playing this macro challenge. There's only a couple things they can do. They can tell their workers to mine. Okay, so they get used to click and drag, right click, okay, now I'm mining, I'm making some money, and I have these structures over on the right. What do I do with them? Well, real-time strategy players know that macroing, the concept of making more units out of your existing structures, that's one definition of macro, that's one way it's commonly used, is extremely, extremely important. It's in fact like the #1 skill that you teach beginning players that makes them into novice players. Well, what if there were tutorials whose only purpose was to make the player build units out of those buildings and then go defeat an enemy over that way? They can't control the units, they can't control their economy, the only thing they can control is making extra units. That would be a macro challenge. Here's another example of something being split. What about an economy challenge? What if the player has those same buildings and they automatically make units? The player does not have to make the units themselves, that's fine, but the player doesn't start with as many workers and their castle can build workers. Or maybe they start with one castle and they have to learn to expand. All you've done there is you've eliminated the unit control that is inherent in the army side of the game. You've eliminated the macro components of making more stuff that is inherent in that part of the game. And you've just told the player all you have to focus on for this challenge is making more economy. What about a unit control challenge? What if you say, you don't need to worry about producing any more units. In fact, we won't give you the ability to make more units. In fact, you won't even have the ability to get gold to make more units. All you have to do is take this square box, this rectangular thing of units, and control them. And then you will win the mission. Can you see how we're now splitting up the tasks that are required for a player to learn inside of a real-time strategy game? Can you see how now we're giving them something to work on? But there are a couple pitfalls that should be avoided with such a move, with such an approach, and they're as follows. You don't want to make the maps too long. If they are forced tutorials, you don't want them to be too long because you don't want to alienate expert or even experienced players, intermediate players, who have better things to do than to be taught how to do the thing they know how to do. It's like being taught how to jump in a game that you've already beaten once and you're on the New Game Plus. It's worthless to them and frustrating besides. It's like the Pokemon, how to catch a Pokemon tutorial for everyone who's ever played another Pokemon game before. Yes, there may be that rare person, there are new people all the time who've never played a Pokemon game. They need to learn how to catch Pokemon, but do you really need to learn again through another forced tutorial? At least make it brief if you can't make it skippable. And then there is another aspect. These tutorials should be almost impossible for the player to lose at. You can give them a gold, silver, bronze ranking. You can make it so that they understand how they've done well, badly, or great. The above average, normal, below average. And here's the other thing. For each of these challenge types, only force the players, all players, when they start the game, to go through one instance of each of them. The ones I would highlight would be macro challenge, just so they can make units and they know how. Economy challenge, so they know how to go ahead and make more workers to help their economy grow. And unit control challenge, or unit challenge, where they know how to control some units, even if it's against a force that's far inferior that they can easily overwhelm. Make sure they know how to do things like a move, and to right-click to move if they want to ignore a target, and how to drag and select units. That's extremely important. And in fact, I would expand the concept beyond that, because now here's something that you can take from tutorials that is not applicable to what is done in the fighting games overall, which is not applicable to the idea of an isolated training room, which is not applicable to the idea of just grinding games over and over in ranked until eventually you practice that skill. Here's an idea. One of the things that StarCraft 2 did that was phenomenally successful. Now, I don't know the monetary success of it, but I do know from percentage of player base and the activity that it got on the Reddit, just anecdotally and just looking at it with my own eyes and talking to people who were still in the game, who hadn't taken ranked quite as seriously as I had at the time that I was playing StarCraft 2. People loved cooperative missions. They didn't like co-op versus AI, where there's just a normal computer and you go beat on them with normal builds and you beat them down and then that's fine. No, what they loved were the cooperative missions, where you and another player, sometimes extra players beyond that, but usually two, would beat a mission. Both of you group up, you would pick a hero, and then you would determine the difficulty level, and then the challenge would start and both of you are in it together. And in fact, that's one of the things that would be such a boon to implement inside of little war games, but there already is a way how. But how, Itano, you might ask? How would we do that? That seems ridiculous. You do it through these challenges. You absolutely do it through these challenges, because what you do is you make challenges 1 through 4 or 1 through 5. Again, you only make the first challenge of the 3 types. Macro challenge, unit challenge, and economy challenge. You make the first one required for all players when they make a new account and they're level 1 before they can get access to anything else. That's what they do. Then, if they want to, you give them access and let them know, hey, in the tutorials or in some other designated place that is given prominence, particularly if people want to learn, maybe with in-game gold rewards for their accomplishment so that they're encouraged to practice it if they want to get gold, just as a way of making sure that there are more eyeballs on the scenario. You make challenge maps 2 through 5, okay, 2 through 4, whatever, single player. But then here's the kicker. After that, let's say that 1 through 5 are the single player versions. That's the equivalent of grinding in the lab. And these missions would only be a minute or a minute and a half for people who are very competent. maybe 2 minutes at most. And for people who are less competent, they might enjoy the small amount of challenge that it provides them, but it would be made such that they wouldn't be so frustrated they would quit. It would be something that could be in, out, and done probably almost without fail in about the 4-minute mark, 5-minute mark. But here's the genius part. Here's the part that I think actually clinches the difference and why it's so important to have broken down everything previously in the video. Once you've gotten the macro challenges that are only for one person, only single player, you take it out of single player. You absorb the wisdom of seeing all those people playing games like StarCraft 2 and the Cooperative Missions. You absorb the wisdom of just looking around Little War Game. You see people who are playing 2v2 Neighbors and 2v2 Symmetry and even Diag 2v2 all the time. All the time. It is a natural tendency for new players to want to hook up with an ally, someone that they can, if you want to be frank, sometimes they want a person to blame for their loss. Sometimes they want a person to carry them because they know they're not very good. Sometimes there are things they don't know about the game, and this is their in to get with a more experienced player. But if you take that same existing trend, it already exists, you don't have to make the trend up. You're just taking advantage of the trend. If you take the trend that people already are looking for 2v2s and 3v3s, you know what you do? You make these same challenges, cooperative multiplayer versus AI. So for instance, for the macro challenge, right now, in fact, I will even say I have made macro challenge 0, macro challenge 1, and macro challenge 2, where what you do is, all you do is you tell workers to mine, you go over to these buildings, you make units, and the units, you can't control them, they move over to the side and wipe out enemy units. It's only a test of your macro. Let's say that macro challenge, macro challenge 4, 5, let's say, is the last one. For macro challenge 6, what you do is you make it a cooperative multiplayer team game. You and another person up against the AI, up against whatever the difficulty is. You ramp up the difficulty slightly, not directly in proportion to the strength that would be required for 2 competent or intermediate or let alone expert players to play. No, you make these things so that someone who has like 20, maybe 30 APM on average between the two of them could take it out, could deal with the situation. And now there are players who are interacting with other players. And if there are in-game rewards, such as in-game gold, or they get experience at a higher rate for doing these maps, and they're pushed towards these maps because they get gold, silver, bronze ranking to determine how well they're doing. Or perhaps they just get gold based on their performance, which would be even better. You do all of that. Now people want to play these macro challenges. You know what? I probably wouldn't play a map that's macro challenge 6, personally, if it's like 3 minutes long. But if that macro challenge 6 is 3 minutes long when I'm playing, and I get to play with somebody else, and we both get increased experience, and we get gold, I've been around for years and years, and you know what? There's a thing called the Skinner box. There's a reason idle games or clicker games are so popular. People like watching numbers go up. It fills them with a sense of accomplishment. And here is why you would do such a thing, why you would split all of these factors in Little War Game up such that the onboarding and the accessibility is higher, because you give people a bare minimum. You don't require them to beat all of the single player challenge maps before they can go into the multiplayer challenge maps. And then when they're in the multiplayer challenge maps, they're encouraged to play them because they get rewards, because they have a new account, they want extra experience, they want extra gold, and these things will provide that. That would be the hope. And then they realize, this is kind of fun, or this is a bit difficult. And so they keep playing them. And you know what's great about that? Now you have created a game that those people can play that teaches them real-time strategy concepts for Little War Game without requiring them to actually play ranked Little War Game. There was a statement issued years ago where a company famously said, "We believe the best way to improve in our game is to play the game," as a defense of not making a sandbox mode where other people could just, in fact, practice whatever they wanted to practice. That's completely asinine. Whereas, if you're going to tell a new player that they have to go up against ItanoCircus or increasing in difficulty, ItanoCircus hobo, works, AC. They have to just like get their head panned in against somebody so they can practice skills. They can't see any difference between where they were and how they're improving. They might even be going backwards. They have nothing to guide their learning, and it's because they're looking at this sheer face wall to start, and they don't know where to start. There's too much to start with. It's too much to handle. There's too many genres. It's too synergized. There's too much together. But if you split it up into these tutorials of the types I've mentioned, macro challenge, economic challenge, unit challenge, and you give compensation to the players for doing it, now you're encouraging in them the ability for them to gain skills in real-time strategy games by doing a fun, fast mod and leaning into. You're not changing the trend. You're taking advantage of the trend that they want to play. They want to be social. They want to interact with people in a format and in a game style, and particularly in an RTS of little war game that can feel very lonely. If you enjoy the content that I make on this channel, or for the Little Wargame RTS channel on Twitch, or throughout any other space that involves Little Wargame, please consider subscribing to the Patreon link in the description box below.